Welcome! Today, we're diving into the massive world of international taxes. At the heart of it all, there's this one simple but incredibly important question that every global business has to answer. And the answer to that question determines who gets a slice of literally trillions of dollars in profits.
So here's the big question. Let's say a Japanese company is selling its products in the United States. Which government gets to tax those profits? Is it Japan, where the company is headquartered? Or is it the US, where the sales are actually happening? Maybe both. I mean, without a clear set of rules for this, global trade would pretty much grind to a halt. Luckily, there is a rule.
The solution comes down to this really important concept called permanent establishment, or just PE for short. You can think of it as the official line in the sand. It's an idea that's agreed upon in international tax treaties, like the big one between the US and Japan. And this single concept is what decides whether a country gets the right to tax a foreign company's profits.
So, what is a permanent establishment? Well, in simple terms, it's a fixed place of business. If a company has one of these in a foreign country, that country gets to tax the profits made there. But if it doesn't have a PE, then generally speaking, that country can't touch those profits. It's basically the all-important on-off switch for international taxation.
The best way to really get your head around this is to think of it as a business footprint, right? If a company is just kind of dipping its toes into a foreign market, leaving a small, temporary footprint, well, that's not enough to trigger taxes. But once that footprint gets deep and permanent, that's when the host country steps in and says, all right, you're clearly established here. It's time to pay taxes on the money you're making.
Okay, so what kind of footprint is big enough to be considered permanent? What actually crosses that line? Well, the US-Japan Treaty gives us some really clear-cut examples of what automatically creates a permanent establishment. No gray area here.
These are the obvious ones, right? If a Japanese company opens up an office in New York, or a factory in Ohio, or even a mine somewhere, yep, that's a PE. These are non-negotiable, fixed places where the real business is happening. They create a clear, undeniable footprint.
But what happens when that footprint isn't a permanent building, but something more temporary? Like a huge construction site or a big installation project. The company is physically there, but it's not forever. Well, the treaty thought about this, and it sets a very specific time limit.
And the magic number is 12 months. So a construction project that lasts for, say, 11 months and 29 days, no PE. But the second that project crosses the 12-month threshold, boom, it instantly becomes a permanent establishment, and any profits from it are now taxable in that country. So when it comes to projects like this, time is everything.
Now this is where things get a little more interesting. Just having a physical space in a country doesn't automatically mean it's a PE. The treaty actually carves out some really important exceptions for activities that are considered just preparatory or auxiliary.
This comparison really lays it all out. On the left, you've got your core business activities, the stuff that directly makes money, like selling things or manufacturing products. That creates a PE. But on the right, you have auxiliary activities, things that support the business but aren't the main event. Think of a warehouse that's only used for storage, or an office that just buys supplies or gathers information. Those things do not create a PE.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. The key word in the treaty is solely. The rule is super strict about this. So if you have that warehouse that's used for storage, but you also have a sales agent in there closing deals, well, it's not being used solely for storage anymore, is it? That mix of activities flips the switch, and the whole place can suddenly become a taxable permanent establishment.
So far, we've been talking about a physical place of business. But what if I told you a company could create a taxable footprint without an office, a factory, or anything like that? They can actually do it through a person, an agent who's acting on their behalf. This is kind of the hidden part of the rule, but it's just as powerful.
The treaty is really clear here. It splits agents into two different camps. First, you have an independent agent, like a broker who has their own business and works for lots of different companies. They do not create a PE. But then you have a dependent agent. This is someone who's basically an extension of the foreign company, someone under its control. That person absolutely can create a PE, even if they're just working from their laptop at a coffee shop.
So how can you tell if an agent is creating a PE? Well, there's basically a three-point test. First, does the agent have the power to actually sign contracts and close deals in the company's name? Second, do they do this all the time, habitually, not just as a one-off favor? And third, are their activities core to making money for the business? If you can say yes to all three of those, then that agent effectively is the company's taxable footprint in that country.
All right,
We've been deep in the weeds with fixed places, timelines, and agents. Let's pull back for a second and ask the big question. Why does this one concept, permanent establishment, matter so much? Well, because it is, without a doubt, a foundational pillar of modern global trade, especially between huge economies like the US and Japan.
This rule creates certainty. Companies know exactly what they have to do, or, more importantly, what not to do to trigger taxes in another country. And that clarity encourages them to invest abroad. At the same time, it prevents businesses from making tons of money in a country while using tricky setups to avoid paying any tax there. It strikes this crucial balance that allows trillions of dollars in trade and investment to flow smoothly between nations.
And all of this brings us to one final really interesting thought. You have to remember, these rules were mostly written before the digital economy completely took over. And that leaves us with a huge question for today. In an age of remote work, cloud servers, and digital sales, what does a fixed place of business even mean anymore? It's a question that tax experts all over the world are trying to figure out right now, and whatever answer they come up with is going to fundamentally change the future of global business. Thanks for joining me.